What's going on, everyone? So we're getting more and more reports that the Toronto Raptors are serious about trying to acquire Damian Lillard. And this is not something that I believe came out of left field. I mean, I talked about it before the actual reports of Toronto being interested in Dame came out, right? I talked about Toronto being that team very likely that was reported as like the unknown team that hasn't been named. And I was like, it's probably Toronto. If it's not Toronto, it's either the Brooklyn Nets or the Indiana Pacers because they said it was an Eastern Conference team. And the reason Toronto made sense is because Toronto, the whole thing with Toronto is Usai Ujiri, right? He's the guy that is not afraid to go all in and go get the guy, right? We saw him do that with Kawhi Leonard, and it led to an NBA championship. And Toronto, since then, has basically done nothing. Right? And there's been a lot of questions of like, is Ujiri kind of that guy that had that moment? And everyone was like, oh, this guy's the greatest GM ever. And then that was it. That was his moment. And they've tried to kind of move this team in a very specific direction, kind of go positionless basketball and have all these sizable wings. And it just hasn't worked out. They've been very underwhelming the last several years. And at some point, they got to shake things up. And a team like Toronto, yes, Dame might not necessarily want to go there, but if they're able to get Dame and still have something like a Pascal Siakam and a Scotty Barnes, because my guess is the package is centered around like an OG Anunoby, Gary Trent Jr., and then maybe some draft picks, whatever, right? Maybe they throw in some of the other young guys or something like that, right? Maybe they throw in like a Flynn or a Harper, a Coloco, whomever, right? They throw in a couple pieces and they have basically their core unit, right? You'd have a Damian Lillard, you'd have a Dennis Schroeder, a Pascal Siakam, a Scotty Barnes, you'd have a Jakob Poeltl, right? You probably, hopefully, maybe you can keep McDaniels. If you could have, I don't know, can you keep Dick or do you have to end up trading him? Regardless, you have the core guys that are important and significant, and then you're just kind of putting the remaining pieces to the puzzle together around Damian Lillard. And Dame, kind of like Miami, but I just think their star power is better, right, with Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo, but depending on how well Scotty Barnes continues to grow and develop, Pascal Siakam is already an excellent talent. It's kind of the similar scope of like Dame provides Toronto what they need desperately, and all the things that Damian Lillard is bad at, Toronto is good at. They got the size, they got the length, they got the switchability, they got the, basically all the pieces outside of that go-to scorer, the guy that could go for 30 on a consistent basis, the guy that can close games down the stretch, hit big shots, right? Because Toronto, you'll see, they're in a lot of games. They just don't have that guy that can close. And Pascal Siakam is their best player. You're not winning anything significant with Pascal Siakam as your best player, right? But again, you have Pascal Siakam, you have Damian Lillard, Scotty Barnes kind of continues to grow and take that next step. All of a sudden, you're looking at it and you're like, okay, Toronto could be a pretty good team. And I don't think if they go and get Damian Lillard, it's not so much for this year, right? Toronto's not going to get Damian Lillard and all of a sudden be an NBA champion, right? But you get Damian Lillard, and then all of a sudden, you're in that mix of like probably the top, 6 teams or whatever in the Eastern Conference. And then next year, the following year, you can go get those missing pieces, those glue pieces that kind of put the puzzle finally together, and maybe then you can move into contention. And the difference between what happened with Kawhi Leonard and getting Damian Lillard is Damian Lillard you have for multiple years. Where Kawhi, you had one shot. You knew Kawhi wasn't staying there. You knew he was going to leave. Where if you're Toronto, you're looking at it as we could go get Damian Lillard and we have him for several seasons. Dame's not that guy that's going to go and try to blow that up, right? Like, he's a professional through and through. He's going to go and play and do whatever is necessary to help Toronto because that's the team that he's on go and try to compete on a regular basis, right? And Toronto is one of those teams that they can go and trade for Damian Lillard and still have a very good team, right? Like that's the big thing is, again, how many teams can actually trade for him without blowing up their entire roster and still have key pieces around him that can make Toronto formidable, right? And I think Toronto is one of those teams, right? But it's going to be interesting because whether Toronto ends up picking him up or not, we're still getting reports that, Blazers are refusing to speak with the Heat, that, no trade is imminent per Woj, that talks have intensified with other teams other than the Heat, right? And that to me makes sense, right? Like Portland wants to get the deal done by the time training camp comes around. But they need to do their due diligence, right? You can't just, what the Miami Heat can give you. That very likely it's going to be a multi-team deal. And it's something that I talked about in a video, kind of talking about, like, it makes sense that Toronto or that the Heat aren't talking to the Blazers anymore, and that teams like Toronto and Philly and things like that are starting to talk to them, because what is there left to talk about with Miami, right? Like, if let's say it is a multi-team deal, right? Portland's just going around asking, okay, well, who are you willing to give up and what are you looking to get from the Miami Heat, right? Oh, well, we want Tyler Hero. Okay, well, what are you looking to give up for Tyler Hero? If you did want Damian Lillard, what are you looking to give up for Damian Lillard, right? Like, that's the conversations. You know what Miami has. You know what that conversation looks like. You've already had that conversation. You're just now doing your due diligence to find, is there something better? And if there's not necessarily something better, can you make something better with Miami still getting Damian Lillard and some of the other pieces going X, Y, and Z, right? That's kind of where we're at right now. It's kind of how it feels based on the reports and news. And granted, we don't know for a fact what's going on behind the scenes, right? For all we know, Miami has the deal done and they're just working out the semantics, right? We don't know. I'm not saying that they do. I'm just saying, like, we don't know. We're going off of a mixed jumble of reports that are constantly all over the place. And this person saying one thing, this person saying another thing. So the way I like to look at it personally, and I think that this is a good way to kind of take this stuff, is what is the consensus? What are several people all saying that is very similar or the same, right? And it all seems to be that this is very likely going to be a multi-team deal. Toronto Raptors have all the opportunity and tools to get a deal done if they want to. Philly, if they're willing to trade Maxey, may be able to get Damian Lillard. And Phoenix really wants Nurk. It's kind of where we're at. And there's a lot of talk that they're not speaking to Miami right now. As far as like trade talks go. But again, for me, that is just primarily because what is there left to talk about, right? Like, it makes sense that you would be really ramping up conversations with Toronto because they're a team that is capable of trading for him, and that you have a GM with Toronto that would want to have him. And look, I've never said that it's a lock that he's going to Miami. I still believe that that's where he ends up ultimately, but I've said countless times that I wouldn't be surprised at all if he ends up elsewhere. I mean, we just saw this with Donovan Mitchell last year. He was hanging out at Knicks games or Madison Square Garden. He's living his best life. He's, wearing Knicks jerseys and stuff. Like, the dude thought he was going to the Knicks. The Knicks thought they were going to get the deal done, and then boom, here come the Cavs out of nowhere. If anything, this just puts pressure on Miami, right? And I assume, and this is just my guess, I assume Miami is having conversations with other teams for the other players. Like, I don't think Miami's just sitting around waiting. And, like, they're the reports that have came out that Miami, they're not desperate for Dame, and, they're okay with essentially losing him if they. I don't buy that. I don't. Like, they have done everything in their power to go and get Damian Lillard. They need Damian Lillard badly. They do. Like, out of every team that could potentially land Damian Lillard, Miami needs him the most. Right? Like, and so, of course, you're not going to show your hand. You know, like, it's, of course, you're going to play hard to get. Of course, you're going to play like, hey, look, do what you want to do. Like, if you don't want to trade him, it's no big deal. We're good. Right? And that doesn't mean somebody else, like, Donovan Mitchell may be available next offseason. Right? Like, maybe Miami can make a push and go get him. Right? I mean, that could be a possibility. I mean, it's not like there's always going to be that next guy. Maybe it's a Trae Young or whatever. Right? There's always going to be that next guy that becomes available. So is Miami like desperate? Are they like, you know, we'll give you our firstborn child or something? No, of course not. But they still really need him. Like, if they want to have real success this year, I think they really need him. Look, Miami, against all odds, made the NBA Finals last year. Does anyone really believe if Giannis was healthy, Miami was beating them? I mean, seriously. Like, if Giannis was healthy that entire series, start to finish, does Miami really win that series? Personally, I don't think so. I don't. Maybe I'm crazy for thinking that, but I don't see that scenario where Miami beats a healthy Milwaukee team. And they're a team that was in the play-in, right? Lost the first play-in game. Miami, as currently constructed, where are they on the scale amongst other teams? Probably in the play-in again. Right? I mean, seriously. Like, you still have Milwaukee, Celtics, Sixers, Cavs, Knicks, right? Maybe Miami can get into that 6th spot. But let's say Toronto ends up getting Damian Lillard. I think Toronto has potential to be better than Miami and could squeeze in that 6th spot. You know, like, I mean, Pacers are going to be better this year. They're actually actively trying to win. I don't know. Again, we'll see. Time will tell. But I do think Miami needs to do whatever it takes to get Dame, personally. But I wouldn't be shocked if Toronto comes in and swoops him up. Right? I wouldn't. Because they did it with Kawhi, and the difference is you'd have him for multiple years. Not just one shot, that's it. You go get Dame, and then you figure it out in the next year. Right? You keep your core guys, you got your core group. Now you're just kind of, again, filling out the rest of the puzzle to go and contend for an NBA championship. That's how I look at it. But anyway, as always, this is a discussion, so I pass the question on to you. Let me know your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. What do you think? How do you feel? Do you think Dame ends up with the Toronto Raptors? Do you think stays with the Miami Heat? How do you feel? Whatever your thoughts are, I'd love to hear it. Let me know down in the comments.